the end of March, leading into April, the Institute of Race Relations conducted latest round of polling, looking at a range of questions, trying to understand the zeitgeist and thinking of South African citizens, political party support levels, and probably most importantly, what they would want their government to do, what they want in terms of policy actions, service delivery, etc. Joining me to unpack their latest report, Hermann Pretorius, Head of Strategic Communications at the Institute. Hermann, thanks very much once again for your time being back here on the CRA channel. We're going to aim for around 60,000, 70,000 views to beat our previous video from a week or so ago. So let's see how we do. Hermann, a bit of a, one would, I guess in court, you would call this leading the witness, or at least trying to ask a bit of a leading question. The methodology of the polling, because of course here you are saying in this report, in the polling itself, you are saying that the results are representative of all South Africans' views at all times, in all places, in all centuries, etc., etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, so you see, the thing about polling is that it is quite often misunderstood as a form of magic or alchemy. But and I think pollsters are probably to blame for it. I think many pollsters oversell what they are capable of doing. But at the end of the day, opinion polling really is a bit of a data science. It's mathematics. It's really nothing too spectacular, and one can explain the basic idea of how it works relatively simply. Is if you have a pizza and you want to know what the pizza tastes like, you don't have to eat the whole pizza or a quarter or the majority. You just need to make sure that you pick a slice that is fairly representative of the whole. You make sure that it's got a bit of the crust, a bit of the cheese, a bit of the toppings. And if you pick your slice right, it could be actually a very small slice that could give you a very good idea of what the whole pizza tastes like. And we have a sample size of 807, and our people say to us, well, 807, that's so small in a country of 60 million. Now that sort of misunderstands what makes a poll credible or not. Sample size isn't everything. For example, I could have a poll of 10,000 people, but I could have a terrible result because the people aren't representative. I'm just eating the crust of the pizza and just thinking because I've eaten the whole crust, I know what the whole pizza tastes like. And a good way to sort of explain why sample size matters up to a point is to think of flipping a coin. If I've got a coin and I flip it, it's going to be heads or tails. And after one flip, it's going to be 100% heads or 100% tails. If I flip it a second time, it might be 100% tails and 100% heads still, but it might be 50% heads and 50% tails. And if I keep on flipping this coin, at some point we're going to reach a stability of the proportion of what I get. Whether I flip it 1,000 times or 600 times or 1,000,000 times, we're roughly going to end up in the province of a 50-50 split. The odds that we know are connected to a coin with just two sides. So if we get to a point of 600 flips or 800 flips, we can get to sort of the bell curve spread. And the mathematical sort of central limitation theorem kicks in to make sure that we get to a spread of data that is useful to extrapolate from. So that is why a company like Pew Research or Gallup can poll the entire United States of 300 plus million people with a sample size of about 1,200. It's not the size of the sample, it's whether you get that representative slice. And in our polling, we really try to do that. We break down by province, we break down by language, we break down by income level, age, education level, residential area, employment status. We've got about 28 different identifiers to make sure that our sample is representative. So is it representative of all South Africans at all time across, all dimensions? No, of course not. That's not what a poll is. But is it a fair interpretation and a fair representative sample of what South African registered voters think as of, March, April, May 2025? Most definitely.
And Herman, then to get into what South African voters think, we will link to the full report in the description, so we won't cover exactly all of it in this discussion. But to get into, I think, especially voter preferences and what they want in terms of policy priorities, if we start, let's say, with the ANC, you can, of course, link this to some of the other key findings. But we start with the ANC, where never mind that they dropped from above 50% in the 2019 election to last year, 40% in the 2024 elections, or 39%. That in and of itself is a very concerning sign. Now, if you look at what Institute polling tells us year after year, what did you find in this latest round that indicates there's more and more of a divergence between what the party leadership tells its supporters and South African voters they want versus what they say in this kind of survey?
So the fact that about a month ago we saw the polling indicating that the DA has now inched above 30%, with the ANC dipping below 30%, that is quite telling. And within the context of the VAT debate, that made sense. The survey was taken at a time of, that debating intensity around the budget, with some parties strongly in favor of raising VAT, others opposed, and the parties that opposed the VAT hike got the benefit in terms of our opinion polling, and the parties that supported the VAT hike didn't. And the ANC was on the wrong side of that debate. But that didn't happen overnight. If we compare the 2004 election with the 2024 election, we see the ANC at its strongest point and at its weakest point. In 2004, they get essentially 70% of the vote. Why? It's a time of a growing economy, increasing fiscal stability, sufficient fiscal room to start the rollout of welfare programs. Service delivery is on a good trajectory in terms of housing, water, electricity, unemployment inching downwards, the Asian commodity boom and a bit of its sort of effects before and after really benefiting the South African economy, and the ANC gets the credit. However, we then look 20 years later and we see them go from 70% in 04 to 40% in 24. What do we see? We don't see a growing economy. We see an economy that has stagnated at a national level and at a per capita level is sort of in a perpetual recession. We see unemployment inching upwards or, remaining at crisis levels. The handle can't be seen to be gotten on that particular charging bull. We see service delivery stagnating or going backwards. So all the macro indicators are negative for the ANC. Add to that sort of trajectory the VAT debate, and you see why it was so easy for the ANC to drop within a year from 40% to 30%, because the things that had eroded that stable support base were long-term components that then suddenly got highlighted by this proxy of that. So over time, we can see the ANC falling out of touch with its own supporters. In this poll, we see the ANC supporters wanting, like most South Africans, or like the average South African, the priority is job creation, and yet the ANC doesn't have a proud record of job creation. We see opposition to the Expropriation Act amongst ANC voters at a higher level than at the national level, where already there's a majority against the act. We see opposition to race-based appointments amongst ANC voters. We see opposition to race-based procurement practices amongst ANC voters. We see a preference for a government that focuses on job creation rather than welfare expansion. So on every single measure that we looked at in this report, the ANC in government and in terms of what it's offering as policies are out of step with not just South Africa, but with its own remaining supporters. And that should worry the ANC, because it is, what's the good old line is, we can't dissolve the people and elect a new one. The people have their priorities, and the political parties that cannot work with that can't grow within that context, have no other option but to do the opposite of grow, and that is to shrink. So if the ANC can't right the course, can't reestablish the fact that it should spend political capital on the things that matter, at least to its supporters, then we are seeing an ANC that will increasingly weaken, and the possibility of a wholesale collapse, similar to the 1993 Canadian election, where the government there went from 43% to 16%, a scenario like that isn't out of the possibility if the ANC doesn't address this disconnect.
Herman, given declining ANC support levels and what you've highlighted in terms of what South Africans want their government to focus on, that doesn't automatically translate to higher support for other political parties. So even though the ANC has declined so radically, maybe if one had a longer view and had been following CRA and IRR analysis for a few years longer, you wouldn't have been surprised to see this kind of thing. But just to link this to opposition parties, I mean, you maybe focus specifically on the Democratic Alliance, the second biggest party in the country. What did you see in the results that there are opportunities for opposition parties to focus on and pivot towards, and maybe not be tempted by some ANC policy, even though some of these parties, including the DA, are in the GNU? So in a way, have to support national policy, but also differentiate themselves. We've got the local government elections coming up next year. Yeah, where are you seeing maybe the easy wins for opposition parties, as it were, to increase their electoral support?
So the first thing perhaps to note is that we shouldn't over-rationalize voting behavior along policy lines. Just like your consumer isn't always a rational actor, we don't always do bargain hunting. We sometimes just like the branding of a product, or just find it at the comfortable height on the shelf, or just sort of find it vaguely familiar, it rings a bell, then we buy it. We as consumers shouldn't over-intellectualize the exercise that we do within the market space. It's still a free thing, so we're not going to try and manipulate that. But similar to the sort of consumer irrationality when it comes to decision makers, voters are similarly not always rational. So we shouldn't read into policy preferences the exclusive be-all and end-all of voting motivations. Policy forms part of the values offering that ultimately reaches the voter when they walk into that ballot booth and they must make a decision. They might not necessarily think policy, but they might think attitude, they might think overall impression, they might think familiarity, but policy forms part of all those components, because I always say, if you don't have ideology, you can't have policy. If you don't have policy, you can't have actions. If you don't have actions, you don't have a message. And if you don't have a message, you don't have vibes. And at the end of the day, South Africans, or voters generally, really do remember a collection of data points when they head into the ballot booth, with not necessarily a lot of specificity. So where there is an opportunity for other parties to come into this weakness space of the ANC, I think we can look at both the DA and MK, who can take the data in this report and come to quite divergent conclusions as to how that informs their political strategy. The DA can look at this data and see a moderate, relatively centrist, pragmatic, socio-economic aspiration across all lines of division: race, class, language, income levels, the lot. We see there's a clear, comfortable national majority for merit in appointment rather than race preferences, for value-based spending rather than preferential procurement along racial lines, opposition to the Expropriation Act, a realization that property rights are necessary to, the sort of upward social mobility that people want to see. And in that, the DA can see its moderate message resonating. They could say, look, the party, in terms of its policy alignment, already is quite close to what South Africans want. And then they should ask themselves, but if that is the case, why has it been a 20% party where the ANC has been a 50 or now a 40% party, barring our polling from a month ago that put them now neck and neck? And the answer is quite possibly that they haven't contextualized that message as they should have, like they did with the VAT debate. The VAT debate cut through. It was a binary question. It was a clear bread and butter issue. It wasn't an issue of them versus us in terms of public perception. It was very much a question of the tax hikers versus the people of South Africa, with the DA on the right side of that. So for the DA, they should look at this data and understand that their message has been weak. Their performance might have been strong, their policies might be in the right place, but they haven't broken through on, for example, job creation like they had with VAT. And that's a problem for them. Some reason for hope, some reason for disquiet. MK, on the other hand, has a real populist opportunity here because the data isn't only pro-growth and moderate, there's also a flavor of anti-elitism in the data. And you can spin property rights as quite an anti-elite a policy to say that, we don't want you to be tenants of the land. We want you to be owners of the land. We don't want you to be serfs. We want you to be citizens. There's a populist angle to a policy of secure property rights that MK can take and build on its charismatic insurgent movement. Then also with empowerment policy, where the data shows a preference by 76% for voucher-based programs rather than the existing employment equity and affirmative action programs. And again, MK can harness that and say, we want empowerment at a grassroots level, typically populist, we can say at a people level. We want it at the people, not at the level of officials, bureaucrats, and politicians. So both the DA and MK can look at this moderate middle, this pro-growth 2-to-1 majority that is consistently visible across the polling, and adjust their political strategy accordingly. But for the DA, it will be to get a stronger message because the pitch has been rolled for policy agreement. For MK, it will be to make sure that the strength of their message is now complemented by a substantive interpretation of the policies that South Africans want.
And Hermann, just a final question, moving away a little bit from the political parties, talking about business and corporates in South Africa. Again, I recommend that people go and read the whole report. There's too much, I think, good insight that I'll be able to quote here. It would make the discussion quite a lot longer. But in the conclusion, you write, business leaders, along with organized labor and civil society groups, wield the leverage to accelerate a shift to such a renewed pro-growth consensus. They should anchor every engagement with government in the new polling arithmetic. South Africans want merit, value, and choice, not paternalistic socio-economic engineering. This is happening in the context of, as we record on the 20th of May, President Ramaphosa meeting with President Trump on the 21st of May. As we record, the meeting is scheduled to still take place. Your message from the polling, from years of IRR polling, for big business, for corporates, as to where they need to focus their energies in terms of maybe being tempted to just go along with government to get along versus what they should be doing and could be doing to their own benefit and, of course, to the benefit of South Africa from a growth point of view and from a liberty point of view.
What we can talk about these almost as soft political power. They don't have hard political power or votes in parliament, but they have soft political power in the sense that they can define the political environment within which politicians then make decisions. Business and labor, civil society, ordinary citizens can be upstream from politics rather than downstream from politics. Because if you're downstream from politics, you're going to get responses like the mining charter. You're going to see politics happen, and then the consequences of it will come at you, and you will need to make a pragmatic business decision of what you make with this challenge that you do not really want to face or experience. But if you go upstream from politics, if instead of being a receiver of policy, you start becoming sort of a policy influencer ahead of the political game, you can, through your engagements with government, just start introducing the reality that from now on, or within the next 5 or so years, your company, whatever company you have, whether it's big or small, use the engagement to say, we're going to start doing merit-based employments. Otherwise, we're not going to have the in-house skills to be able to deliver. Start turning the conversation not from, oh, the political masters are giving policy, how do we adapt? Rather say, this is what the market forces want. This is what the opinion polling shows South Africans want. How can we use that to say to politicians, look, we're not going to try and compromise with you. You must meet us on the grounds of what will be economically sensible and viable and sustainable. So I would urge businesses, don't just go along to get along. And I'm also at the same time not being, baby with the bathwater in the sense of, just set fire to all bridges. But use your soft power when you engage with government to say to government, not, I think we can find a compromise here or here. Just turn it on its head and say, instead of going, this is what the government wants, how can we make it work for the people and the consumer? Say, this is what the consumer wants. How can the government make it work for them? Start shifting the assumptions of where policy is shaped and who responds to who. And you can get ahead of policy and make sure that we see the sort of shift that ended apartheid. We did not see businesses abandoning the National Party until it was clear that their consumers wanted them to, or that market pressures needed them to. We're heading towards the same inflection point where business must understand this temporary government is going to die at some point. The ANC's monopoly on power is already crumbling. But the consumer will be there tomorrow, they'll be there next year, and it's your relationship as a business with your consumer that must start informing how you interact with politics, rather than your relationship with politics that informs how you interact with your consumer. Use that soft power, get ahead of the curve, and indicate to government you need growth, not you want growth, and you sort of will try to fit it around what they're saying. Turn it the other way around. Soft power can allow you to do that and change the fundamental context of the political debate to build that pro-growth consensus.
No doubt, as South African politics becomes more competitive, is more competitive, and does become more competitive, it's up to business and civil society to fill a lot of those voids that are going to be left. I think that should be tackled with, eyes wide open, with all the data and analysis that businesses might need, and should be seen as an opportunity, not as this intimidating risk that they just are helpless to deal with, and to be active sort of agenda setters. So I'm glad we ended on that constructive note. I think, Hermann, thanks very much once again. Greatly appreciated. To all of you, thanks very much for watching. If you haven't yet, before you leave, please click on the like button. And also, if you haven't yet, please click subscribe, become a subscriber of our YouTube channel. And finally, if you are not yet a premium client of the CRA, there's no better time than right now to become a client of the CRA. You'll find more information at the link on our website below. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh for the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care, everybody.